Alright, so today we're going to be going over a board that was fucked up by an idiot. So, one of the things that you're probably going to notice if you're searching around for board repair and things like that is that there's been a large amount of people who are doing this on eBay for as low as $109. And one of the phenomena that I've been noticing with a lot of these places is that I've been getting a lot of questions in my inbox that are really, really silly. They're not the regular level questions of, PP5V, S5 is there but not S3. It's usually along the lines of, this doesn't work, what I do next. And when I'm Googling these names, I'm often finding that these are the names that match the eBay account names that are doing this stuff for $109. And I want to show you some of the faults that are going to happen and some of the things that are going to fail when you give your board to a moron to save some money. So, this board is a board that a customer got fixed by somebody else, and one of the problems with it is that it came back and it worked, but, he said that it had no trackpad. So he brings it here, and I'm going to show you some of what we did to troubleshoot the no trackpad issue, and I'm going to finish up by fixing it. So when you look by the trackpad connector over here in the microscope, it actually looks fine. You really don't see any missing components. And also, according to the schematic here, you're supposed to get, let me just zoom in on the schematic so you can see it. All right. So right over here, you're supposed to get a few rails of power. So you're supposed to get PP5V S3 _ trackpad and PP18V5 _ S3. Now, I checked that PP3V3 S3 was there, and I just gave up because I thought that 18 volts was for the sensor. I didn't know that 18 volts was actually for trackpad movement and everything else. But live and learn. So let me show you what I decided to do to figure out the issue. Now, one of the things about any electronic circuit is that any electronic circuit that you deal with has a path to ground somewhere in the circuit. So, regardless of whether it's an amplifier circuit, a data circuit, a signal circuit, whatever it is the thing is supposed to do, there's going to be a path to ground between the circuit and whatever it's supposed to be doing. So, one of the things that you can do to figure out if a circuit is not, what part of a circuit is off, is you can take your multimeter and you can measure in diode mode the voltage drop to ground at each individual point in the circuit. So what I do over here is I take this fluke multimeter and I put it in diode mode, which is where you see the little line with the arrow and the line at the end. I put the red probe on ground, and I put the black probe where I want to actually measure. And what I do here is I have an Excel spreadsheet. So what I did is I decided to go through every single pad of the trackpad connector. So let me just zoom in on this a little and I'll show you what I see. And again, if you're at a point where you're stumped because you've just missed or overlooked something fairly silly, this is a really good way to, just figure out what it is you missed so that you can go over it again. So these are all the different pins on the bad board. These are all the different pins on a functioning board. And the only pin here that's different is pin 21. So there was let's see, over here you had an infinite voltage drop, or not measurable, on the bad board to ground on pin 21, and over here you had a 0.639 voltage drop to ground. So we look over here, and on pin 21 you have PP18V5 _ S3. So I go to search around this circuit on the board. So what I do is I go to the board view over here. Let me just zoom out a little so you can see the board view. And I look for where it shows up. So it shows up over here on the bottom by the trackpad connector, and it also shows up on the other side over here at R5806. So let's look up what R5806 does. So R5806 is actually where PP18V5 _ S3 leaves its boost circuit to go to the trackpad. So let's see where this is supposed to be on the board. So on this side of the board, on the bottom side of the board, it's supposed to be all the way over here in the bottom right corner. I know you probably can't see that. So let's look and see what's over there. So when we turn it around and we look over here, there is nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's gone. Which is why our trackpad is not working. I'm moving this around because I don't know what the exact viewable field of the microscope is, and I want to make sure that you see it. And so again, I'm not going to say who it is. I'm not going to say who it is just yet that did this, but the whole point here is you're right that people can get a job done cheaper. They really can, and they can do a decent amount of it properly. But what you have to think about is not that they can do the same thing. What you have to think about is every single step of the way, what is being compromised, what is being cheaped out on. And here, for all you know, they had a PhD technician do an absolutely amazing job. But then they had some little fucktard that gets $1 a day who puts this back into a bag to ship it back to the customer, which is how this gets broken off. Again, so think of how they're going to be handling the board. Think of how they're going to be picking this up. You know, this workspace is a mess. Many of the workspaces I visited have been messes, but all the people who handle these boards have a basic level of respect for them. They're not like grabbing them like this and having their nails chip away at everything. Because again, this is right on the corner, so it's reasonable to say that somebody probably just picked this up and just grabbed it like and treated it like shit, which is why this little piece is missing here. So this is a 0 ohm resistor. You could really just get away with probably a fuse or a solder blob there, because a 0 ohm resistor is really nothing other than a piece of wire that's just going to expire if the power goes too high. I'm hoping that you can see this. Anyway, so we're just gonna first tin these pads. Hopefully those pads are still there because it looks really disgusting. Alright, so let's just clean this. So I'm moving back and forth while adding new solder, because the new solder and the flux that's contained inside the solder is going to absorb a lot of the dirt and the garbage that's on the board. Because if that was actually ripped off, then that's just not going to be good for us. So, next thing I do, I'm going to get the desoldering iron to remove all that junk that went on the ground plane. I can't wait to get a station that includes desoldering. It is Christmas time, folks, so, you know, I want to say thank you. Weller 3R 3M 3000 Hacko FM 206, you know. I like this thing, but it's almost 8 years old. And heats up like it's 8 years old. Come on, there are people waiting. Okay, so hopefully you can see what's in the microscope camera. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take that 0 ohm resistor off of a obviously worthless board, and I'm going to put it on this one. And again, you probably not, there's only like a 50-50 chance that you'll actually get to see the soldering I'm doing until I get a monitor splitter so I can actually see what is going on, or what it is that you see in the microscope camera, since the microscope camera has a limited field of vision. But we'll see. I'm just going to move it around a little so I soldered it improperly. I want to make sure you see what it's improper about it. The left side is sticking up. So I already added good solder there. So what I'm going to do is just reflow, and it should sink down just fine. And you can also see that this trace on the board here is kind of, oh, am I kidding, very well sodomized. Ugh. That pad barely exists, so let me try to work on that with the finer soldering tip. with also a finer iron. And hopefully you can see this. Don't hate me if you don't. Alright, I gotta make sure it's on both sides. I don't know why I'm obsessed with getting this straight when it's clearly going to conduct electricity and work fine as is. Alright. At some point, you just have to accept it for what it is. And I'll clean off the little bit of solder that I got back on the ground plane later. Yeah, I did get solder on the ground plane. I will clean that off later. I just want to see that this works. Do you see there? So this copper trace is kind of etched off of the board here, which is why the solder is actually sticking to it. The solder mask is gone. And that is the replacement resistor. 0 ohm resistor. So let's see what happens when we put this inside of a laptop. Yeah. Ignoring them. Let's Right, so I'm turning it on right now and I'm holding down Option. Since holding down Option is going to bring up the screen where I can choose the drive that I want it. And in that screen I'll be able to see if my trackpad works. So right now, as you can see, I do have to figure out why there are lights on the screen. That should be the lines from the backlight. But as you can see, the mouse is moving. There. Or can you see that with this camera angle? See? Mouse is moving. Now, one of the other things I want to get into your head with these videos is also to be asking the right questions. So a common question when the keyboard or the mouse don't work is what chip controls the keyboard and the mouse, what chip controls USB, and people will ask, like, what chip controls USB and the mouse so that I can replace it? You've asked the wrong question. The right question would be what is not working so I can replace what is not working. So on this board you have U5701, which a lot of people would jump to replacing without actually figuring out why the board doesn't work. So let's go over here in the schematic so I can show you what I mean. So over here, if you search, even in the first diagram, you see that the MCP, which is the main chip that controls just about all the in and out inside the machine, connects to U5701, which controls trackpad and also keyboard. So here we go. So this is the MCP, and this board, it's based on an MCP 89. I finally got a good pointing stick. So that's over here. Now this is U5701 for trackpad and keyboard. Now why would you replace a perfectly good U5701? And the right question is not what chip controls the trackpad and the keyboard so I can replace it. The correct question is why does my trackpad not work? Which is why I went through and did those measurements. So I go over to where the trackpad is because, again, everything by this chip looked perfectly fine. It didn't look damaged in any way. And so, you know, be fine. So I went through every single part of this connector. All I did is I did a basic diode mode measurement to ground, which is again red probe on ground, black probe on every one of these. And I just measured the voltage drop to ground between a working 820-2879 and a non-working one. I recorded them in Excel, and you compare. Pin 21 is the one that is off. I look and see what pin 21 does. So pin 21 here is PP18 V5 underscore S3. I look over here, and then I look on the board, and I see that the first component over here is actually missing, and the solder pads look screwed up. So just make sure that you're asking the right questions when you're trying to figure out what your problem is. Make sure you're asking a question that is relevant to the problem that you have, and not just a question of jumping to conclusions. You don't want to jump to conclusions and say, I know this is wrong, where do I find this? Or I know the backlight chip is the problem, where do I find this? Because very often it's not that. Like I know somebody who actually has T-shirts printed up for iPad backlight repair where it says, it's never the coil. And the running joke here is you go to every single one of these forums and every single one of these websites, and they're saying, oh yeah, replace the coil. Oh, you just have to find a new coil. Oh, put a solder block over the coil. But it's not the coil. It's the filter. But everybody just wants to think it's this because it's easy, and everybody said that's what you have to do, and they just want that to be the solution because everybody said that's what I have to fix. No, there is no shortcut around using your brain.